All right, let's jump right in. We're going to talk about a skill that, yeah, it sounds a little technical, but it is absolutely crucial for any credible work in international law, and that's proper citation. Honestly, getting this right can be the difference between sounding like an authority or not being taken seriously at all.
So, have you ever looked at a legal document, seen a footnote that looks something like this, and just thought, what on earth am I even looking at? If it feels like you're trying to decipher some kind of secret message, well, you are not alone.
Because here's the secret. It kind of is a code. But the good news? This explainer is your key. We're going to crack it wide open together so you can see the logic, understand the patterns, and start citing with total confidence.
Here's how we're going to do it. First, we'll talk about why this is your credibility code. Then, we'll get into the real nuts and bolts, starting with the bedrock, treaties. After that, we'll move on to cases. Then we'll untangle the world of official documents. And finally, we'll zoom out and connect all these little rules to the bigger picture.
So, let's start with Section 1. It's so important to get this right off the bat. Citation is not just about following some dusty old rules. It's about transparency. It's about giving your reader a roadmap to check your work, follow your logic, and ultimately, to trust what you're saying. It's literally the foundation of authoritative legal work.
Okay, so on to Section 2, citing treaties. Since treaties are the fundamental agreements between countries, they're really the bedrock of international law. So, naturally, that's where we're going to start building our skills.
Right away, the first thing you need to figure out is pretty simple. Is the treaty multilateral, meaning it involves lots of countries, or is it bilateral, meaning it's just between two? For a huge multilateral treaty, you'd never list all the countries involved. But for a bilateral one, you do. You just pop the two parties in parentheses right after the title. It's a small detail that tells you a lot about the agreement.
So, where do you find the right version of the treaty to cite? Well, there's a clear pecking order. You always start at the top with a big international series, like the United Nations Treaty Series, the UNTS. If for some reason it's not in there, you go to a national series from one of the countries involved. And only after that do you look at other publications. This just makes sure you're always using the most official version.
Let's see this in action with a classic, the ICCPR. You got your full title, the key dates, and then the citation, 999 UNTS 171. All that means is you can find it in volume 999 of the UN Treaty Series, starting on page 171. See? Not so scary. And check out that last example for pinpointing. It shows how to direct your reader to a very specific part of a different treaty, the Refugee Convention, just by using its short title and the article number.
Okay, moving on to Section 3, citing cases. Right after treaties, the big judicial decisions are the next major source of law. These cases are the precedents that really shape how law gets interpreted. And we're going to start with the big one, the International Court of Justice, or ICJ.
Citing the ICJ is actually pretty straightforward. Here's the rule of thumb. If the case is in the official ICJ reports, you cite that. That's the gold standard, period. If it's a super recent case that hasn't been published yet, then you can cite it from the ICJ website. But, and this is super important, you have to include the URL and the date you accessed it.
Here's a perfect example of a classic case, the Corfu Channel case. You can see every piece of the puzzle here, the name, the parties involved, the year, the abbreviation for the official reports, ICJ Rep, and the page number it starts on. Clean, simple, perfect.
The ICJ also issues what are called advisory opinions, and the citation style is almost identical. Look at this example from the Wall case. You've got the name, it clearly says it's an advisory opinion, and then the usual year, reporter, and page. And see that bit at the end? That's a pinpoint, telling your reader exactly which pages to look at.
Of course, there are a ton of other tribunals out there besides the ICJ, and they all have slightly different citation styles. But don't let that intimidate you. The trick isn't to memorize them all, it's to recognize the patterns. You're always looking for the same basic ingredients, a name, a date, and some kind of unique case number or identifier.
All right, Section 4. Now we're wading into what can feel like the deep end, official documents. If treaties and cases are the solid ground, the endless stream of documents from places like the UN can feel like a maze.
So you're reading along and you see this, a jumble of letters, slashes, and numbers. It looks like total gibberish, right? Well, this is that secret code we were talking about at the very beginning, and it's not random at all.
And here's the decoder ring. Each one of those little parts has a specific job. The A tells us it's a General Assembly document. COF means it's for a conference. 183 is the specific conference it belongs to. And 9 just means it was the 9th document they issued. Suddenly, it all makes sense. The big takeaway here
is that this document number is the single most important piece of information.
This same logic applies when you're citing resolutions from major UN bodies. Whether it's the General Assembly, the Security Council, or the Human Rights Council, the key is the resolution number itself. For some, like the Security Council, you'll also add that full document number we just decoded. And here's a pro tip. You almost never need to write out the long formal title of the resolution. Just the number will do.
So, we've gotten pretty good at cracking the code for specific citations. For this last section, let's zoom out. Let's look beyond the footnote and talk about the big idea that holds all of this together. Because look, the goal here is absolutely not to memorize every single one of these rules for every possible source. I mean, who could do that? It's not a memory test. No, the real skill, the thing that will actually serve you, is learning to see the patterns. Once you understand the logic behind the system, you can pick up any source, even one you've never seen before, and know exactly what you're looking for. In fact, everything we've talked about today really just boils down to 3 simple principles. That's it. First, source hierarchy. Always use the most official source you can find. Second, core components. Always look for those key pieces of info, parties, dates, identifiers. And third, consistent formatting. Just pick a style and stick with it. That's the whole game.
And that brings us to one last, much bigger question to think about. We've been down in the weeds, in the technical details. But how does all this meticulous, careful work actually strengthen the authority and the legitimacy of international law as a whole? It's that connection, from the tiniest footnote to the entire legal system, that really gives the law its power.